Welcome to the PFF Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm your host, Ian Hartitz, and today we are going to break down the fantasy football team preview for the Washington football team. This will be the last edition of the NFC East. After that, we will be continuing all 32 teams, right up until week 1. So without further ado, your 2020 Washington football team fantasy football team preview. Now, it's a great story seeing Alex Smith, get the pads back on. He, could have easily hung it up, and the 17 surgeries or whatever it was, like, my goodness. But I think it would be borderline coaching malpractice not to let Dwayne Haskins continue to be the guy. If 8 weeks go by and the guy's struggling, okay, then we can have a conversation. But I think the idea that Haskins was written off after, let's see, he gets thrown into the fire against the Giants halfway through the game, and you can say, okay, they're a bad defense, but, remember, it's a situation that he wasn't even being remotely prepared for, seemingly. And then he gets thrown into another game halfway through against the Vikings. And then finally, the coaching staff, pulls their hands back and go, okay, Dwayne, we've been throwing you in the middle of these games. Now go into Buffalo for your first career start. I mean, just, and you put in the reality that who was he throwing to other than Terry McLaurin all last season? The offensive line was a joke, and that the entire Bill Callahan game plan was seemingly to give Adrian Peterson 20-plus carries up the middle. So could not have been a worse environment for Haskins to play in. And yeah, the results were awful. You look at his overall QB rating, 38th. His QB rating on deep balls, 35th. Under pressure, 27th. Kept clean, 39th. Like, there was no good metric takeaways from Haskins' season as a whole. But again, with that context, bad scheme, bad weapons, and, just brutal start to the season in terms of what he was asked to do, there were times where he did look like the same guy that broke Drew Brees' all-time record for most touchdowns in a season in the Big Ten. I mean, by the end of the year, games against the Eagles, Packers, Giants, all of a sudden Haskins was making a hell of a lot of nice plays. I mean, Haskins had this one throw against the Jets where the play actually didn't count and he got called back on a hold, but dude literally whipped the ball across his body almost 60 yards downfield and hit McLaurin in stride. I mean, the arm talent is there. I know we all laughed at Stephen A. Smith when he called Haskins his dual threat guy back in the day, but, he's never been that quarterback. The guy has a rocket. He is incredibly talented. Like, I'm not giving up on him yet. Unfortunately, you look at the team this year, and okay, they added Antonio Gandy Golden, a couple tight ends to help, but like the fact that Terry McLaurin is still just far and away this offense's number one wide receiver, I guess depending on what happens with Antonio Gibson, but it's just troublesome. You would have liked to see them go out, get a few more weapons for Haskins because, again, he did flash some of the real high ability that made him the first-round QB in the first place. It was just more of a matter of, I think, similar to what Josh Rosen has gone through in his first 2 seasons. Like, there were just, other than, the top 5-10 QBs in the league, I don't know who would have made that Washington offense, look anything other than miserable for most parts of last year. So not giving up on Haskins just yet, but it is concerning that, there's not more going his way in 2020 other than, a natural year 2 leap and, some new coaches that will hopefully make a more scheme-friendly system for him. So the good thing is, ideally we kind of know what's going on there. Again, maybe Smith takes over at some point. I kind of doubt it. Great story, but Haskins should be the guy. Now, the running back room is where things get messy because, with Darius Geis out of the picture, it's looking like Adrian Peterson will be the starter, but Bryce Love should be the guy that, comes and also sees a lot of reps. And then we have, reports out of training camp that Antonio Gibson and J.D. McKissick are getting all the pass down work they can handle. And, oh yeah, Peyton Barber is also emerging as the group's best pass down back. So it is an absolute mess. And honestly, I'm going back to Antonio Gibson here. And I'm not drafting him in the top 5 or 6 rounds like some of you psychos out there. But the guy, just evaporated seemingly some of PFF's college football broken tackles. I'm not sure what they're putting in the food in Memphis to get these just bonker seasons out of Pollard, Gibson, Darrell Henderson, some of the things he was able to do. But the fact that Gibson is this, 6 foot, 230-pound guy with sub 4.4 speed, he can catch and run. Like, this incredible versatility is almost being used against him. Oh, where are they going to play him? That's for the coaching staff to figure out. And the reality that they spent a second round pick on the guy to put him in this unproven running back room, in this unproven wide receiver room. I mean, the ceiling is the roof for Antonio Gibson if they can just figure out a way how to get this dude 10 plus touches per game. Unfortunately, he's being listed as an RB in all these leagues, and it'd be much better if he was a wide receiver that had an RB workload and also 5 targets per game. Just that it'd be so rare at the position, you'd be able to get, I think, more value out of him if he was designated as a receiver. So at running back, it's a little bit worse than we prefer, but I just think by week 6, week 8 maybe, Gibson could be the guy. And Ron Rivera throwing around that, hey, Gibson has a similar skill set to Christian McCaffrey comparison. I would never make that comparison. I think comparing rookies to to future multiple-time All-Pros is a bit ridiculous. But similar to when Andy Reid comped Clyde Edwards-Helaire to Brian Westbrook, when it's the guy's own head coach making the comparison, we should probably be listening. But with that said, Bryce Love also deserves some credit here. I know it's not the same coaching staff that got him, but he only went in the 4th round last year because of that injury. So much big play upside. If this gets down to just Bryce Love and Antonio Gibson, that could be a fantasy-friendly backfield. Now, unfortunately, we got Peterson, McKissick, and Barber to try to figure out. But, man, eventually, hopefully, we get down to 2 backs with just Love and Gibson. I don't think it's going to be immediate, but I'm fine taking later round flyers on Love and Gibson. Don't use a top 6, maybe even top 8 round pick on Gibson. I'm not that high on the guy just in the early parts of the season, but just in terms of dynasty outlook, I would definitely be lining up to get Antonio Gibson sooner rather than later from that aspect. Moving on to the wide receiver room. It's Terry McLaurin and everyone else. And Steven Sims, we'll talk about him a little bit more, but just not expecting too much from, Antonio Gandy Golden or whoever is going to end up taking this number 3 role with Paul Richardson gone, Kelvin Harmon done for the season. It's the Terry McLaurin show. And, there's no reason why this guy can't push for some absurd target total. He only had 93 last year in 14 games, but, would have cleared 100 with 16 games. 150 targets are on the table, and the guy deserves it. This is one of only 9 rookie wide receivers to average this many yards per target since 2010. You look at the guys that average more yards per target than Terry, and we got Kenny Stills, A.J. Brown, Juju Smith-Schuster, Anthony Armstrong, Julio Jones, OBJ, Keenan Allen, Terrence Williams, and Deebo Samuel. Okay, there's a few busts in there, but whole lot of all-pros too. And if you go back and just look at what McLaurin was able to accomplish last season, he roasted the Eagles, but put on the first Cowboys game. He's turning around Byron Jones and beating him for a touchdown one-on-one. Put on the Lions game when, he wasn't able to put up that big of stats on Darius Slay, but you go ahead and look at some of those incompletions, and he had Darius Slay in a pretzel a couple times. So the big thing going against McLaurin to start the year was that he was just this world beater with Case Keenum under center, and we worried if he could do the same thing with Haskins. Well, as we talked about, wasn't exactly the cleanest first few games for McLaurin and Haskins to get on the same page, and by the end of the year, we really did see them get on the same page on a much more consistent basis. Week 14, McLaurin had 4 catches, 57 yards, 1 touchdown. Week 15, 5 catches, 130 yards, another touchdown. Week 16, 7 catches, 86 yards. That was on 7, 5, and 9 targets, too. It wasn't just like Haskins was feeding the dude 15 looks per game. They showed the efficiency, final 3 games of the year. And the idea that, only Case Keenum could really enable McLaurin these great heights was always kind of ridiculous to begin with. Haskins, McLaurin obviously do go back a ways with their Ohio State playing days. And again, I think it's a situation where we have so much open talent, so much talent from McLaurin himself. It's a screaming buy in, fantasy football leagues of all shapes and sizes. Now, Steven Sims is the other interesting option. This guy ended the year with just big lines. 5 catches, 45 yards, 1 score, 6 catches, 64 yards, 2 scores, and ended the season on 5 catches, 81 yards, and a score. Man, I saw Steven Sims. I didn't know much about him going into last year, but he had that 60-yard touchdown run against the Patriots. He had some really electric returns, and I pulled up his player profiler page just to see what his athleticism was looking like, and he clocked a 4.6 40 at his pro day or something. I don't know what he ate that morning, because this dude, when he gets the ball in his hands, looks like one of the faster guys on the field. So Steven Sims should be that main guy in the slot. Probably Antonio Gandy-Golden as the other guy on the outside. We'll see what happens. But Steven Sims is the only other guy in this offense in the passing game, mainly that is, other than McLaurin, that you should look to get with any sort of urgency. Even then, it wouldn't be shocking to see Trey Quinn, someone else, kind of take those targets away. But Sims does seem to have, a decent level of talent, decent level of ability in the open field. So I'm not against throwing a late round pick on him. So that's the wide receivers. We're not going to spend much time on the tight end group. I mean, we have Jeremy Sprinkle, Logan Thomas, Richard Rodgers, Marcus Ball. The Randy Moss's kid just got released with an injury designation, or put on IR with an injury thing going on. So I just think last year, we had Sprinkle playing almost a full-time role, was never getting involved, and now we have guys like Logan Thomas and Richard Rodgers that are going to make this a 2 to 3 tight end committee. Do not touch any of these guys with a 10-foot pole in fantasy football land. So, just a reminder to everyone out there, before you do your drafts this year, I've had my friends come up and ask me, what's just a good quick draft strategy? And I've maintained, unless you're doing one of these really contrarian, win $1 million, there's thousands of people competing tournaments, do not go zero RB. Try to leave your first 3-4 rounds with at least 2 running backs, and then go get your baller wide receivers, because go do some best ball drafts. If you're going to do them, go to Underdog Fantasy or go to a mock draft somewhere else. Just do 1 or 2 of these before you do, your important redraft league with your friends, and look at the running back landscape after the first 4 or 5 rounds. I mean, we've spent these entire, last 2 weeks on Twitter with people now coming out and backing Leonard Fournette as, value at his ADP. We don't want risky players in the top halves of these drafts. You're not going to win your draft with your first 3-4 round picks necessarily, but you can absolutely lose it if you don't walk out with some good guys. So, I am trying to get 2 of the top 15 running backs in the first 2 rounds. And then why am I taking Leonard Fournette in round 3 over, an Adam Thielen and Allen Robinson, who I both have as top 7 wide receivers, even a Calvin Ridley, borderline wide receiver 1. I don't get it. I think there's far too much risk, and he could meet value. I understand his RB7 last year. I know a large portion of his targets came on first and second down. I'm very aware of, Chris Thompson being, this guy that, as Washington fans know, he can get hurt. But Jay Gruden did throw him the ball a ton. Didn't mean for this to become a Leonard Fournette bashing part of this Washington football team podcast. But, these best balls, again, go get your running backs early. Go do an Underdog. Use code PFF. Get a free entry into the $1 million competition. And look, if you can get Leonard Fournette on the squad and win $1 million using code PFF, kudos to you. I wouldn't do it, but hey, America, it's a free country. So on to the ranks. Quarterback, I have Dwayne Haskins as my QB 30, 1 spot behind Derek Carr, 1 spot ahead of Mr. Jarrett Stidham. It's just tough to really expect him to do much from a fantasy perspective. I mean, I have him, pretty much as the last and least productive quarterback that we're expecting to start, the heavy majority of their team's games. And look, there's not really any rushing upside. And again, like kind of Aaron Rodgers, while I would like to project Haskins and Rodgers to, have a nice bounce back year, there's been a lot of good offseason kind of storylines to indicate that. You look at the roster and what the front office has done, way harder to make that decision for those guys. So running back, this one's tough, guys. I would put Antonio Gibson right there as my RB 40, 1 spot behind Chase Edmonds, 1 spot ahead of Keyshawn Vaughn. It's, having him I feel like he's probably going to be gone before me in most drafts, and that has been the case recently since the Darius Geis news. Bryce Love is the guy where, I have him a little bit lower, RB 51, but I think he's the value. He's the one you're going to be able to get in more of these drafts. And, we'll see if AP can just keep chugging along, if they're going to keep giving him the ball. But, again, sneaky chance, I think, for an incredibly crowded backfield. But if Love and Gibson can emerge as the 2 studs that they should be and go get those touches with, an assumption of rational coaching, which we all know doesn't always work out, I think that is a scenario where we would look back and be happy about those Gibson and Love selections. As a whole, though, if you walk away from these fantasy drafts without a Washington running back, you're not going to feel bad about that at all. Wide receiver, I have Terry McLaurin, wide receiver 16, 1 spot behind DJ Moore, 1 spot ahead of Amari Cooper. these just undisputed number one pass game targets are undervalued. And, okay, I'm taking a little more of the proven talents before McLaurin, your DJ Moores, your Beckhams, Juju's, Ridley. But, man, I have McLaurin ahead of Cooper, ahead of Evans. Who, okay, in a vacuum, who would I want? Amari Cooper, Mike Evans, or McLaurin? Okay, McLaurin would be last there, but I don't see either Cooper or Evans having that same sort of shot at 150 plus targets. And, while I would take Cooper or Evans over McLaurin, I think the talent is close. I mean, PFF, did name McLaurin the single best wide receiver in the NFC East last year from their player grade. So I have McLaurin as like my top wide receiver, undisputed wide receiver one on a bad team this year. It's all Terry McLaurin. Steven Sims is going to be a bit further down the list. I have him as my wide receiver 72, behind Rashad Perryman, ahead of Danny Amendola, Russell Gage. I'm going to do a little rankings refresh here soon. Wouldn't be surprised if Sims, creeps up more into that early 60 range. I don't think he's really a priority for redraft. There's enough guys that I would want ahead of him, like, Randall Cobb, Brandon Ayuk, Alan Lazard, who I think are in better passing games. Even if Sims can be this team's number 2 pass game target, I mean, they barely enabled Terry McLaurin last year, and that was really it. So I like Sims, but really not much front office backing. We're basing most of the hype around him on a real small sample at the end of the year. I do think he's talented, but definitely not someone you need to break your back to get in fantasy. And yeah, do not draft any of these tight ends, please. I would consider it a personal insult if you leave a fantasy draft with a Washington football tight end. So don't even do it as a joke. Come on, people. Don't do it. Washington football team win total is 5.5 wins. The only team with a worse win total is, I believe, the Jacksonville Jaguars at 4.5, and Washington's tied with the Carolina Panthers at 5.5. I am going to take under 5.5. I don't think this team is anything close to an 8-8 unit. The one really interesting part about Washington is if Haskins can really take a leap, there's it's like they're 2 years away from being last year's 49ers, because you just look at this defensive line and they've been bad long enough that now they're just chock filled with these first round monsters. With Daron Payne, Jonathan Allen. Now we got Chase Young to complement, Ryan Kerrigan, who's obviously been doing his thing forever. And, just Montez Sweat coming back from last year. I mean, that's 5 just beasts at the line of scrimmage. And unfortunately, losing Dunbar and Norman, just, proven to be washed by the end of last season. I mean, there's no real cornerback talent to speak of. And, as PFF has, gone into over the years, it usually is better for a pass defense to have better coverage than pass rush. Doesn't mean having a great pass rush is bad. I mean, obviously you want great pass rush, great coverage, but, it's interesting to see Washington really load up on the D-line while you see other teams, Patriots, Dolphins, Chargers, going on and investing more in the secondary. So little case study to be made there, but I just don't think that D-line is going to be good enough to make up for another awful offensive line, a likely, well below average offense, and everywhere else on the defense just looking pretty mediocre. So I'm going under 5.5, and I have the Eagles winning the NFC East. So that's going to do it, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. This has been your PFF Fantasy Football Washington Football Team preview. Wow, a lot of football to be said there. Thank you all for listening. I'm Ian Hartitz. Until next time, take care, everyone.
Thanks for watching the PFF YouTube channel. And if you want to subscribe, all you have to do is push the button. Don't forget everything you get. A little fantasy, push the button. A little green line for the gambling aspects of the game, push the button. College football, push the button. The YouTube channel from PFF.